The moment Daniel pushed open the restaurant door with his jacket still half-zipped and his phone buzzing with a babysitter's update, he had no idea he was about to change both their lives, or that the woman he was about to rescue had already given her heart to him long before that night. Daniel Reyes was the kind of man people overlooked, not because he was invisible, but because he carried himself quietly, like someone who had learned that drawing attention cost too much. At 34, he was a single dad with permanent worry lines etched between his brows and a gentleness that came from raising a 7-year-old daughter on his own. His days revolved around school drop-offs, packed lunches, and a job he was grateful for even when it exhausted him. He worked as a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm, reliable, punctual, and consistently underappreciated. What he didn't know was that his boss, Claire Whitmore, noticed him more than anyone else in the office. Claire was admired by everyone and truly known by almost no one. She was sharp, driven, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought hard to be taken seriously in a world that loved to underestimate her. As CEO, she had built the company from the ground up after inheriting nothing but debt and a name people expected to fail. She smiled in meetings, negotiated ruthlessly, and went home every night to a penthouse that felt far too quiet. Somewhere along the way, without planning to, she had fallen in love with Daniel's steady presence, the way he listened more than he spoke, how he talked about his daughter like she was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and how he treated everyone with quiet respect. She never intended to fall for her employee. She certainly never intended to hide it. But she did both. The night of the bad date was supposed to be simple. Claire's friends had insisted she get back out there, setting her up with a man who looked perfect on paper. Successful, charming, well-connected. She agreed because it was easier than explaining the ache she felt every time she saw Daniel leave early to pick up his daughter, or the way her heart sank when he mentioned just surviving, as if that was all he deserved. The date unraveled almost immediately. He talked over her, bragged endlessly about his accomplishments, and made thinly veiled jokes about how women like her were intimidating. When the waiter made a mistake, he snapped. When Claire checked her phone, Daniel had texted earlier to ask for a last-minute day off the next week because his daughter had a school recital. The man leaned back and smirked. "Work emergency?" he asked. "Let me guess. One of your little employees messing up again." Something in Claire tightened. She forced a polite smile, but inside, her chest burned. She was halfway through excusing herself to the restroom when he reached across the table without asking, his hand heavy on her wrist. "Relax," he said. "You don't have to pretend with me." That was when Claire stood up. But before she could fully pull away, the man stood too, blocking her path, his voice low and irritated. A few nearby tables noticed. Claire's heart pounded, not with fear exactly, but with the familiar exhaustion of being cornered in a world that didn't always listen when she said no. Across town, Daniel was in his car, parked outside his daughter's apartment complex, rereading a text from Claire that simply said, "Are you busy?" He hesitated. Claire rarely texted outside of work, and never late at night. His first instinct was to say yes. He always did, but something about the message made him call instead. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady, but he heard the strain immediately. "Daniel," she said, and there was a pause that felt heavier than it should have. "I'm at Bellucci's on 5th. Could you help me out of something?" He didn't ask questions. He told the babysitter he'd be a few minutes late, turned the car around, and drove. When Daniel walked into the restaurant, he took in the scene in seconds. Claire standing rigid, her date too close, his posture aggressive in that quiet, socially acceptable way that made scenes easy to dismiss. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped between them, placing himself just close enough to be unmistakable. "There you are," he said warmly, as if he'd been expected. He slipped an arm around Claire's shoulders with practiced ease. "I've been calling you. You okay?" Claire blinked, then nodded, her breath finally loosening. The man scoffed. "Who's this?" Daniel met his eyes, calm but unyielding. Her ride home. The tension broke like a snapped wire. A manager appeared. The man muttered something under his breath, backed off, and stormed out. Claire's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere to go. Outside, the city hummed around them. Daniel took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders without thinking. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. "I wanted to," he replied, then added quickly, "I mean, you asked." They stood there awkwardly, the weight of what had almost happened settling between them. Claire laughed, a short, breathless sound that surprised them both. "I guess I'm bad at dating," she said. Daniel smiled, tired but kind. "Most people are." He drove her home. They talked about nothing important. Traffic, the weather, his daughter's upcoming recital. Claire watched his hands on the steering wheel and wondered how someone so steady could feel so out of reach. Over the following weeks, things shifted. At work, they were the same on the surface, but something unspoken lingered. Claire noticed the way Daniel hesitated before leaving her office now, how he seemed more aware of her, more careful. Daniel, for his part, replayed that night over and over, unsettled by how natural it had felt to protect her, and by the strange pull he couldn't quite name. The challenges didn't disappear. Daniel still struggled with guilt. Guilt over wanting something for himself when his daughter had already lost so much. Guilt over the unspoken rule that said people like him didn't belong with people like Claire. He worried about the power imbalance, about office gossip, about risking the stability he'd fought so hard to build. Claire faced her own battles. She had spent years proving she didn't need anyone, and admitting her feelings felt like surrendering control. She also knew the risk, professionally and personally, of wanting a man who worked for her, a man whose life was already full. The turning point came unexpectedly, on the night of Daniel's daughter's recital. Claire had stayed late at the office, buried in reports, when she realized the time. She remembered Daniel mentioning the recital weeks earlier. On impulse, she shut her laptop and drove to the school auditorium. She sat in the back, unnoticed, as children stumbled through songs with earnest enthusiasm. When Daniel's daughter took the stage, he leaned forward in his seat, pride shining on his face. Claire felt tears prick her eyes, not just for the child, but for the man who loved her so completely. Afterward, Daniel spotted Claire by chance. His surprise was clear. "You came," he said. "I wanted to," she replied, echoing his words from weeks before. They stood in the hallway, surrounded by noise and movement, yet somehow alone. "I need to tell you something," Claire said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "That night at the restaurant, it wasn't just a bad date. I was trying to convince myself to move on from something I've felt for a long time." Daniel's breath caught. "For you," she finished. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Daniel thought of his daughter, of his fears, of the way Claire had looked at him in the car that night. "I didn't know," he said honestly. "I know," she replied. "I never expected you to." He took a deep breath. "I'm scared," he admitted. "But I think I've been scared of this for a while." They didn't kiss then. They didn't need to. What passed between them was quieter, deeper, a mutual understanding that love didn't always arrive when life was neat or convenient. They took things slowly. Claire adjusted boundaries at work, Daniel learned to ask for help, and together they navigated the messy, imperfect reality of blending lives that had grown strong on their own. There were hard conversations, moments of doubt, and nights when fear threatened to win. But there were also small victories. Laughter over takeout, Claire cheering at soccer games, Daniel learning that loving someone didn't mean failing his daughter. It meant showing her what partnership looked like. And sometimes, late at night, Daniel would think back to that restaurant door, to the moment he chose to show up. He hadn't known he was saving more than just a bad date. He had simply followed his instinct to care. In the end, that was the lesson that stayed with both of them, that love often grows quietly, in overlooked moments, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is step forward without knowing they are already someone's answered prayer.